Hello and welcome to the Education on Fire podcast. The place where we share creative and inspiring learning in our schools. Season 1, Episode 2. Hi and welcome back to Education on Fire. Today I'm going to be introducing my resident expert and retired head teacher, Peter Cancel. Hi Peter.
Hi Mark.
So can you give us a bit of a background of your experience and what it is that you're going to be offering on our show?
Yes, of course. I've been in education probably 35 years now in a professional capacity. I was in it for a while before that. But I've been teaching in middle schools, doing advisory work, and then eventually became the head of a primary school. This was for 15 years in a lovely village called Harwell in Oxfordshire. Since then, since retiring, I continued to chair the Oxfordshire Headteachers Association, which is the body that negotiates between schools and the local authority and anybody else, increasingly anybody else that's involved with schools. But then I founded an independent education think tank called the Oxford School of Thought. And just in case I'm not busy enough, I became an associate lecturer for Oxford Brookes University, supervising students who are doing their teaching experience in schools.
Great. Can you expand a bit more on the think tank? That sounds like a really interesting thing to have come up with and been involved with.
Of course, yeah. This came out of a couple of weeks I had off school. I had a quadruple heart bypass, and so I had to take a bit of time off school. And one of the things that I noticed was that there was no independent voice for education, particularly primary education. That's my driving influence in primary education. And I thought, well, why is this? Why isn't there anybody that speaks out apart from the government, the unions, and maybe an odd head teacher here and there? Nobody seems to represent education in general. And all the other stories we hear on the news, there's an independent voice. And so I looked into it and couldn't find any independent think tanks. And so talking to my son, who's in publishing, he said, well, then the answer is to start one. And so when I got a bit of time when I retired, that's what I did. We're hoping that what we would become is a voice that people can turn to get an unbiased view about education. There are so many voices which come across as having a particular axe to grind. And I think that somebody that can try and see clearly that there are different views, but there are clear ways in which education should be carried on, seems to me to be the way to go forward. We've gained a lot of people who are associates of the think tank, a whole list of the great and the good in education, including people like Richard Gerver, Sir Tim Brighouse, John Hattie, former Secretaries of State for Education, a whole range of people who are involved in it, and the idea is that we have discussions about various things, and we try to give an opinion when it's called for. The difficulty is getting established.
Yeah, that sounds really, really interesting, and I like the creative aspect of that, of finding something you think, well, I think this is a good idea, and can I find it out there? And if it's not out there, then, as you said, the way forward is to create it yourself and see where it goes, and that sort of spills over really nicely into our sort of idea of education and that sort of creative and inspiring setup. So can you tell me a little bit about why you went into becoming a head teacher? Was it a natural progression based on being a classroom teacher, or was it something you always aspired to do?
It was a natural progression for me, but possibly not regarded as a natural progression in other terms, because I went straight from being a classroom teacher to becoming a head teacher, and I went from middle schools to primary schools. There were a number of circumstances. The middle to primary was because Oxford itself decided to get in line with the rest of Oxfordshire and close their middle schools and make them become primaries, and that was fine. And I taken the decision that I need to go into primary education anyway, I felt very strongly that the trend for middle schools in Oxford was getting too far away from the primary ideal, which I felt was the most valuable aspect. I found that children in year 7, year 8 who were getting a primary environment were succeeding far better than children in secondary based environments where they're getting specialist teachers for everything, and that fragmented approach. So I felt very much more comfortable with the holistic approach that primary education offered. So that was the reason for my move into primary education. The reason that I went from being a class teacher and had the arrogance to think that I could possibly be a head teacher without becoming a deputy first was because I saw very little benefits in being a deputy. I saw that you got all the bad stuff and none of the good bits. So I tried to step over that link, which I was successful in doing.
And just to clarify for some of the listeners, in terms of the different types of schools, so primary now goes up to basically the age of 11, and then secondary school starts from there all the way through to 16 with their GCSEs, and then A-level after that. So when the middle school system was in place, what age was it that you went between middle school then before you then went to proper secondary school?
It varies in different places, but in Oxford it was year 5 to year 8, so that's from age 9 to 13.
Right, I see.
Some middle schools are 8 to 12, but in most cases it's 9 to 13.
And I think it's a topic that I'd like to cover in later seasons of this, but I think the transition between primary and secondary is a really big one, and having had 2 children myself which have been through that I was going to say barrier, and I think barrier is probably quite a good word, because the type of schooling and the type of way that you're treated between those two things is actually quite stark. And I think some kind of support between those two ways of having to be from the school, I think, is actually something which could actually help everybody, from the parents' point of view as well as the children's point of view. So I think that's something I definitely want to cover as one of our topics as we expand education on fire in the future.
Yeah, I think so too. It's an important aspect. I saw great benefits in the middle school system of that transfer at that age. I mean, the reason that children transfer at 11 is purely arbitrary. There isn't actually an educational reason for changing schools at 11. So we could come back to that, Mark.
Yeah, that's yes. There we are. We're expanding as we're talking. It's fantastic. So, in terms of how the podcast is going to work in the future, as people would have heard in my episode 0 when I was talking about myself and why I set education on fire up, we want to have topics where we can actually explain good practice and creativity and inspiring education for children, and actually be able to make it on a real practical level, on a real sort of, this is what you can do in your classroom yourself, and some ideas about how to do that, and there'll be resources and downloads and things from the website at educationonfire.com. But also, if things are slightly broader than that, or you need some support from the head teacher and the governing body, one of the most important things is how you go about approaching your line manager or your head teacher about how that's going to work. And what I'd like is for you to be able to give them some advice on how you go about that, and how there must be a supportive way of actually trying to create that if that's not the environment in the school currently.
Oh, tricky. It's surprising how much fear there is amongst school staff about approaching a head teacher. That was the thing that struck me more than anything else. Becoming a head teacher, you suddenly discover that you have this power to change things which you've never had in the past, but suddenly people are scared to talk to you. And good head teachers will have that open door, will ensure that they are in contact with their staff. What you suggested is that there are some head teachers that aren't quite like that, and how you break their doors down is the difficulty, isn't it? But you've got to believe, you've got to have a passion for these things, Mark. If you don't have a passion to get it done, it's not going to happen. But all head teachers will want to see things improving. Now, it's how they define improvement that's the tricky bit. If they have that narrow definition that's just about maths and English, it's just about SATs results, it's just about GCSE results or A-level results, if that's the definition of what's improvement, then that becomes very tricky. If you want to do something more creative than that, more interesting than that. I was always very receptive to new ideas and particularly to creative ideas. The one thing that head teachers, I would say to those creative people out there, the one thing that head teachers find it very difficult to deny is when you put on a very successful stage production, a concert or a play or a musical or something of that sort, because it brings in so many parents, it brings in positive responses, it can bring in money. TED teachers are very driven by bringing in money, I think. But it also gives those children so much and develops them so much. So I think that's a really good way of getting performance things happening in school. Very hard for heads to deny that. They do, but it's very hard for them to deny it. So I think that's the most creative way in, probably the most successful way in. And also, it paints the head in the light of being a killjoy if they don't want to do it.
That's really interesting, and the thing I'd like to pick up on there is the fact is actually being able to show people in the room or just being able to say, look, you can see what the children are getting out of this, or you can experience what that's like, and that's really what this show is all about. It's not just talking about how something could happen or what ideas we think are really good. It's actually going to be highlighting and spotlighting an actual school which is already doing something like that. So from that performance element, you said, I'm going to be doing a music topic is one of the seasons, and I'm going to go into schools which are very musical, which have got all the support in the world, and being able to show how you do that within the classroom, what staff they bring in to support that, and what kind of performances they're able to do. But that's great when things are up and running really well. But I'm also going to want to show that if you're just a teacher who doesn't have much musical support within a school, but it's really important to you, we've got the expertise to be able to then just show you what you can do on a daily basis or a weekly basis of things just to get things going. And so from that experience and being able to, for your head teacher to hear the podcast, to be able to see exactly what's gone on in other schools on a really basic level, just so that you can just open that door a little bit and say, look, we can do this. It might not cost any money to begin with, but this experience in this school, these kids are already fired up. They're really enjoying it. They're wanting me to do some more of this thing. And it's just, as you said, when that's the case, it's very hard to then say no, because all you're doing is a positive thing. You're not trying to change the system all in one go. It's just literally from the ground up, just small things which you can implement that just changes the environment enough for people to start to realise actually it's possible, and you don't have to do a really big gear shift, and you don't have to rock the boat massively in order for change to happen. Let's talk a little bit about some of the good trends that you've seen in education in recent times, and also how that fits into the system. Because the one thing I don't want to do is to get too bogged down with the various policies and government ideas about things, because the one thing I'm very aware of is that policies change and governments change, and if we're all waiting for the perfect time for our children to be educated, then we may well be waiting a long time, and in the meantime our kids are still in school at the moment and we're still trying to teach them every day. So what are the positive things that you see on a daily basis that actually are things that we can think about in terms of implementing change just on those small levels, even if it's just the way that you speak to the children, or the way you start the day, or the environment that you're trying to create, no matter what it is that you're actually having to teach specifically?
That's a good try, Mark, but you're not going to get away from the fact that we have got an education system which is in a mess at the very moment. And, there's all the talk about grammar school places at the moment, and that futile argument about introducing more selection, how that will increase social mobility. It baffles me. But there are more fundamental issues, and the pressures on schools to narrow the curriculum are really what I see as being the most important things. And so, we must come back to that at some point. But denying children the opportunity to experience the arts so that they become better at maths and English, it just seems to me to be nonsense. And then to say that those subjects, can be reduced even more to an examinable test, which is fairly dubious in its merits anyway, I think is a real worry. And that's on top of all the issues about teacher training and the way that's been narrowed down, about the way in which PE teachers, or teachers in primary schools particularly, are having their PE taught largely by coaches, and so the teaching element's gone out of it. So there are a whole raft of things that we do need to address at a future date maybe. But they are, as you say, they're not then the policy things, just whatever's current. And so we must make sure we make it the fundamental things. But there are good things. There are good things out there. There are schools that manage to still give children, a broad and balanced education. You wonder what happened to that. But communication is so important. Talking to children, talking to their parents, being able to have that relationship where a child feels that they've got someone they can trust. And in primary schools, that is so often their class teacher. But I would argue also that it's very helpful if that can be that relationship with the head teacher as well. I always did my best to make sure that children were always more than happy to come and talk to me. And it was a bit embarrassing sometimes when you had inspectors in and the children would wander in and give their opinion about something. But apart from that, I always encourage children to try to talk to me as though, it was, I could understand what they were saying. And I would try to talk to them so that they could understand what I was saying. Really important. We don't value the benefits of communication enough, it seems to me. I've ranted a bit and therefore forgotten what your original question was now because you were quite specific.
But it was really the idea of sort of the positive trends that are going on. But I think you did cover that thing about the communication is a really key thing. I think a part of it's getting back to the real essence of what it is that we're trying to do, and the whole idea that it's about teaching and supporting the child to be the best person that they are, and while there is a curriculum that has to be followed and all those things, there are things that we can do daily, and like you just said, the way you talk to somebody, having an open door, actually listening, and interestingly, one of the things that's come up for me over the last few months is being involved with a school that was talking about their ethos and what the school was about and what is it that separates us out from everybody else. And I thought a lot of that was actually a little bit the wrong way round, actually just being who you want to be within a school, and a bit like a stick of rock, making sure that every decision that you make, every conversation you have, everything that you want to get across is the same all the way through that stick of rock. That gives you your ethos, because every decision you make and everything you want to teach comes from the same starting point. And so how you deal with the parents, how you deal with the children, how you deal with your staff, all of those things are based on the same essence of what you want your school to be and how you want it to feel. And I think the ethos comes out of that, rather than having just a few words on a piece of paper that you then just refer to occasionally. And I think that's probably a big thing that separates the really great schools out there. It's just the fact that everything they do comes with real purpose and real understanding of what they're trying to achieve.
That comes back to one of the things I was saying about teacher training, the current trend towards the apprentice model, which seems a bit bizarre. It seems to me it's going back to pre-war, back to First World War, and taking the Victorian model of the apprentice model, the school direct system. I observe students training to be teachers in this way, and I see fantastic practitioners. I see teachers who are really good in the classroom, who are really able to manage a class, to get their message across to children, to build those relationships with children, which fundamentally is what we want to happen. However, what worries me about it is that they're not getting the depth of understanding to understand why they're doing that. And in 10 years' time, when we need them to step up to become senior leaders, will they have that depth and breadth of knowledge, which has, for me, has always stood me in good stead, because it's justified for me, the reason why I do things. I would sit down with my staff and talk about why we were going to do something. I would hope that what I did was talk with them long enough so they believed it's what they wanted to do. That was what I was always trying to do, because it's no good me going there as a head teacher and saying this is what we will do and we will do it this way because I say so, because people will do it. People are very loyal and they're very professional, but actually they won't know why they're doing it and why they would want to do it. And so that's the important thing, is to get that ethos across to everybody in the school, and I used to talk to children in the same way as I talk to the staff, and share with the children what we'd said in staff meetings about what we want to achieve with the school and how we want to make it as good as we could. And I think that's really important. And I think what you just said about that, the ethos in the school that you were talking about, it is vital. It's absolutely vital. And it's funny, often parents would say to me, how do I know when I'm choosing to go to another school, to a secondary school perhaps, or they were moving house and they want advice on which school to go to? How do I know whether it's a good school or not? And as an education professional, I found that very tricky, because the only thing I could say as a parent as well was, you walk in the door and you get that feeling. And you do get a feeling about some places that are welcoming, that want you to be there. And that must be how children feel. We have a great responsibility to make children feel welcome and to make them feel so they want to be there. It worries me that actually with a lot of schools, the pressures on security have made them to feel more like places that you don't want to get into, you can't get into, and people don't want you to get out of. So, I think there are issues there. But making children feel that they want to be there is really important.
Yes, and as the show's expanding in my head every time that we chat, it's the fundamentals of what it is that we're trying to achieve just keep coming back to me. It's not about how you teach maths or English or music or any of the arts. For lots of, it all starts about how the child feels in the school, how interested they are in what they're doing, and how they feel they've got enough expanse in there to sort of follow what it is they're doing through and ask questions and feeling secure. And so it may well be that the first thing you think about is, how do I feel as I walk into the school? And my first conversation with a member of staff and those sorts of things as well. I'm not sure, having not been through teacher training myself, I'm not sure whether those are the things that come up when you're training. But interestingly enough, it's something which we are going to be able to follow, because we are going to have some guest podcasts and some guest blogs, as we're going to follow some students through their training and get a real idea of what their aspirations are and why they were keen to go into the profession. Through their training, to see how the training actually works and how supportive it is for what they wanted, and whether as it goes through it's exactly what they imagined it would be, right the way through to their experience as they go into schools and start training within schools, and also right into the profession as they start to get jobs and begin their careers as full-time teachers. And I'm kind of hoping it will be a bit of a two-way street, that we'll get an insight into what they think and how it works for them and the positive things that they gain from that, and also how the reality may be slightly different, but also these conversations that we're having and as the podcast develops, things that they can be supported with and take into the schools as they start their careers, and actually have a sense of that they've got some control over what they want to do as well. They're not just necessarily having to fit into something which is already there, but within that system they can actually bring ideas and a way of being and an understanding of what's important from the real beginning of as they start out in their life in education.
It's extremely important, and what they will find, as all of us have found in our teaching roles, is that the first bit is so difficult. It's so draining. The training is very hard work, because being with children all the time is hard work. It's emotionally draining, and it comes home to you when you go on a school trip and you think, well, I'm not in the classroom, I'm not teaching all day, but you get back from it and you're absolutely exhausted, and it's actually that responsibility and that strain of being responsible for children, totally responsible for them, is hard work, and that's what the students will find, and they will find in their first year in their jobs it doesn't get any better, but it does slowly get better. over the years you build up the muscles, but it's hard work then to continue with the learning. When you think you've finished your training and you can start working in the classroom, it's hard to recognize that you have to continue driving forward to develop your own ideas, and it's very tempting to just stop developing your own ideas, and that's the worry for me. I get going back to what you were saying about earlier about children being in school. I used to say to parents that when they asked me what was the fundamental driver for what children were doing in school, I used to tell them that I thought the most important thing was that the children were happy. I didn't have any evidence to suggest that children learnt better when they were happy, but I saw children that weren't happy who came into the school from other places, and they were not learning when they were unhappy. And I think we can all recognise that. And it's a very simple message, isn't it? To have a happy place, makes people much better learners.
I think absolutely. I think, as soon as you're not happy and inspired and wanting to learn, then everything becomes much more difficult. And that line is a really important one, because as soon as you cross it, one, it's important to realise that you've crossed it, and also how you return to that point. And I think what I'd like to do is to be able to support both the children from that point of view, and if you see that that's not really working out as a teacher and as someone in education, how you change that back. And most of that is just taking it back into, what am I doing now? How's their experience in this particular situation? What other things can I do to make people secure enough to feel that they are happy and wanting to be creative, but also to support the teachers and the member of staff as well. As you said, being responsible for children is exhausting, and what's out there to support teachers in terms of their well-being, because the only way that you can be a great teacher and be inspiring and full of life and vitality to inspire your children is to feel like that yourself. And if that's not how you're feeling, thinking about routines, ideas, your general well-being and things that you can do to support yourself to enable that to come across in your classroom, I feel is something which is probably often lacking in terms of training and understanding, and even just the conversations about how you go about doing that sort of thing. And I think some of those fundamentals are something which would be a really positive thing to cover as we develop.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that a long time ago I co-wrote a book about raising self-esteem in the primary school, and the first chapter that we wrote was about actually making sure that teachers had good, high self-esteem, because quite often we don't remember that. We forget that teachers need to be in a good place first.
Yes, it's a really key thing, and I think how we approach that will be an interesting thing, and it's an area of life which I'm very into and very keen, and I know my successes and my creativity and the things which I've loved to do have all come from a point where I feel positive and happy and know what I'm about and how I want to go about it. And then in order to go about it and create it, you need to be in that place where you want to get up every morning and go and do it. And so without that, everything becomes a bit more of a struggle. So anything we can do to support everybody to be in that place, I think is a really good place to start. So let's just to round off and just remind everybody about how the podcast in season 2 onward is gonna work. As I would have mentioned in my first episode about myself and about the podcast, we're really taking individual topics per season. and going into schools and education environments and just seeing what's working out there, what situations in each topic are inspiring children and making it a happy place and a positive one in a learning environment. And at the end of each of those episodes, I'm going to bring you back in, and we're going to have a conversation about the merits of these things and talk about why we think it works and what's made it such a positive experience for everybody. And as we talked on briefly earlier on, the ways that you can try and create that within your own school and your own classroom, whether it's just little things that you can do on your own, which is obviously just a question of implementing themselves, but also how you go about speaking to your head teachers or governing body or whoever you need to speak to have a slightly broader, bigger thing, and that's usually probably a longer journey, but just, as we said, opening the door enough just to start to let these things seep in and actually have real classroom examples or real school examples of these things that have actually already happened, so that when you go and speak to people you can say, but it's not just an idea, it's actually already out there, and this is how I think it can actually be put into practice.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it immensely, Mark. I'm pleased to say that having become a head teacher, one of the great benefits was having time to think and time to consider these things. And since retiring as head teacher, I have even more time to think. So I'm looking forward to it immensely, and I can't wait for the first session.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much for being on with me today. And as you know, season 2 is going to be about technology and computing and ICT and things in the school and in the classroom. So I'll see you on the first one of those.
I'll try not to remember too much about the BBC Micro.
Brilliant. Yes. We'll see how far we go back and how far it's come.
Okay. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you for listening to the Education on Fire podcast. For more information, please go to educationonfire.com.